I promised you that I would be back. Dr. E always keeps his promises. I am no politician. Politicians make promises that they don't keep. I am Dr. E, and I make promises and I keep my promises. So I'm back. Let's continue. We're in chapter 3. We're talking about retention. Not retaining weight, but retaining risk, loss exposures. How are we going to pay for it? All right. Some firms structure their retention program by creating what's called a captive insurer. Okay? So a captive insurer is an insurance company that is owned by a parent firm for the purpose of insuring the parent firm's loss exposures. So the parent firm is in another type of business. That business has some loss exposures. The parent firm has gone out and looked for different insurance companies to help them with the loss exposures, and they have had trouble finding the right coverage at the right price, and so they decide to create their own insurance company. There are two types of captive insurers. One is a one parent, the other is a group captive. Okay? An association or group captive that is owned by several parents. And so you might have a trucking company that cannot find good collision insurance, and so they together several of them join together and start their own insurance company, and they cover themselves. All right. Why do you form a captive? Well, if the parent has trouble obtaining insurance, or the premiums charged by the private insurance companies are too high. Okay. A captive insurer has access to a reinsurer. So if you are a parent company without a captive insurer, then you don't have access to reinsurance. So if you form a captive insurer, you can place some of the risk in the captive insurer and then turn the rest of that risk over to a reinsurer. So you are in much better control of your retention and how much risk you transfer. Okay? So if you just do a regular self-insurance program, you can't use reinsurer. And if your insurance company that you own gets large enough and does enough outside business, it could be a source of profit to the parent companies. So often these captive insurers are started just to service the parent company or the parent companies in the group, but then more and more people want to do business with the captive insurance company, and it becomes a profit center. And sometimes the parents get out of the business that they had been in prior to forming the captive, and now they are just in the insurance business. And I managed investments for a large municipal association, and that municipal association was making so much money on their insurance products that they spun the insurance company off as an investment. All right. Premiums paid to a single parent captive are generally not tax deductible, okay, because it's a form of self-insurance. All right, but they may be tax deductible if you really have not self-insurance but an insurance program going, and the way it's bona fide as an insurance company is a substantial amount, which means 30% or more of the premiums comes from unrelated business, and unrelated insureds are not shareholders of the captive insurance company. So unrelated business means that businesses that are not a part of the parent are paying premiums to the captive insurance company, then it's bona fide, and the parent companies that pay premiums can deduct those premiums. And tax deductibility is really important. Premiums paid to a group captive are usually income tax deductible. So you can have a one-parent captive and get a deduction if you structure it right, and if you have a group captive insurance, then those premiums are deductible. All right, some companies form a special type of group captive. This is not that common, but you should be aware of it. It's called a risk retention group. And so the risk retention group pools together and they buy a certain type of coverage. And a lot of doctors will buy medical malpractice from retention groups where the doctors' practices come together, and as a group they get volume discounts from the insurance companies. You cannot form a risk retention group for employers' liability, for workers' compensation, or for personal lines like property casualty insurance. Okay, but you can buy specialty insurance as a group. Okay. All right. Not too much time on risk retention groups because they're not very common. Okay, so advantages of retention. They cost less generally. Okay. That looks a little redundant. Save on costs. The loss costs typically means the loss prevention program is better. And that's related to number 3, encourage loss prevention. So typically it costs you less to run your own insurance operation because you're not looking to make a profit on the operation unless you're doing a lot of outside business. And because it's a captive, the parent pays a lot more attention to trying to prevent losses than they would if they had outside insurance. All right, disadvantages. Losses may not be as predictable because you don't have as large of a sample group as you would if you were a true insurance company that was pooling a large number of losses. And your expenses could be higher because your losses are higher. And you know, the possible higher taxes, I don't even know where that came from. So except to say that if you can deduct your premiums, then your taxes will be lower. Anytime you're using an outside insurance company and you're paying premiums to an outside insurance company, that is a tax deductible expense. And as I mentioned just a minute ago, you have to be careful in structuring a captive group so that you can deduct the premium. If you're not careful, then you won't be able to deduct the premium, and that makes it a lot more expensive. You'll have to pay higher taxes. All right. So another method of financing, handling risk and losses is called a non-insurance transfer. Okay, so you take a pure risk and you transfer that risk, the cost of covering that, to another party. And examples include things like in the contract. You write a contract that says the other party agrees if there's damage, another party will pay for the damage. Same thing in leases. When you're leasing property, let's say that there's a leak in the roof and we have a bad storm come through and the ceiling gets damaged and your equipment gets damaged, and in the lease it says that the owner of the building is responsible for that. So you've got to be careful with your leases. And then your hold harmless agreement, similar to contracts, where you say if something happens, then you're not responsible. And you know, these things have to be drawn up by attorneys, and they're challenged in court all the time. So you have to have a really good hold harmless agreement for it to hold up in court. All right, advantages. There are some losses that just aren't insurable. Insurance companies will not cover them. And so if you can have them covered by these transfers, then that's a good thing. Often you can insure them, but it's less expensive to transfer them via a contract. And sometimes you can transfer a loss to someone higher up in the production process who is in a better position to do things to lower the frequency and the severity of a loss. So if you're not in a position to control a process and you can transfer the risk to someone who can see the bigger picture and can take steps to lower the frequency and severity, then that's a good thing to do. Disadvantages, you got to make sure that the language in these contracts is very clear. Otherwise, they might not hold up in court. And if they don't hold up in court, then your firm might be responsible to pay for the loss even though you thought you transferred the loss. Okay? And sometimes insurance companies won't give credit for transfers, and they won't, they refuse to cover the loss, and they'll still charge you a premium for the loss exposure, even if you go in and say, no, I don't want this loss exposure covered by insurance because I've transferred it. The insurance company might look at it and say, if you want us to insure your building, then we also have to insure your computer system. And even though you have a service contract with another company, and that service contract says that if your system is damaged in any way, they will pay for it, we, the insurance company, are saying to you that we will not insure the building unless we also insure the equipment, and that could be a very expensive proposition. All right, insurance is appropriate for low probability, high severity loss exposures. So as you consider when to use insurance, you're looking at low probability losses that involve a lot of money. That's when insurance comes into play. The risk manager is going to select the insurance company, and we'll get into great detail about how to evaluate an insurance company. The coverages needed by the policy and the policy provisions. So you have to look at what agent you want to deal with and what insurance company you want to deal with and what kind of coverage you want and what are the provisions in the policies that are acceptable to you. All those things need to be reviewed. Insurer considerations include the financial strength of the company, and there are rating agencies out there that handle that. What is the reputation of the company in terms of service, and in terms of the agent? Is the agent well known to provide good service? And let's see, an important provision is the deductible. Okay, so a deductible is a specified amount that is subtracted from the loss payment payable to the insured. So the deductible is an amount that you, the insured, have to pay for. Okay, so the company may say anything above a certain amount we'll pay for, but that first $1,500 or $2,000 or $5,000, whatever it is that y'all agree on, comes out of your pocket. So you retain that amount of the dollar risk. Okay, and in an excess policy, the insurer only pays if the loss exceeds the amount the firm has decided to retain. So there are different ways of handling a deductible, but with an excess policy, what you're saying is any loss that's under $10,000, we're going to cover. So you guys only cover an amount in excess of $10,000. Now that might be per event, per incident, or that might be an accumulation of events. So you might cover the first 10,000 of losses, and then anything above that is covered by insurance. So the risk manager negotiates the contract, and let me just say this: in business insurance, you negotiate. In personal lines, you do not negotiate. They are standard. There are certain policy provisions that are standard, and there are certain premium charges that are standard, and there isn't any negotiation. But with a business, you have to be much more creative as an insurance company, and so you have to negotiate with the risk manager what the coverages are going to be and what the charges are going to be. All right, there's such a thing known as a manuscript policy, and this is a custom-made policy just for a particular firm and maybe for a particular situation. Okay, so with a manuscript policy, the provisions in the contract, the endorsements, which we'll talk about, forms and premiums, everything is custom structured, developed, built for this particular client. All right, people in the company need to understand what is covered by the insurance and what practices and policies the company and its employees must abide by in order to be covered. The insurance company has a duty to cover losses, but you as the insured have responsibilities as well. And if you fail to carry through on your responsibilities, the insurance company could deny your claim. Okay? So once you have a policy in place, then you have to continue to review conditions at your business, and you have to continue to review the provisions of the policy to make sure that it is still the best policy for you. Okay? All right, so advantages of insurance is that you're indemnified for losses. There is very little uncertainty, and insurance companies can come in and help you with your risk management. Really important. And premiums are completely tax deductible, which lowers the cost. Okay. Disadvantages of insurance is it could be pretty costly, but it's not going to be costly compared to the loss, I can tell you that. And you need to have somebody on staff who understands how to negotiate contracts, and you have to have somebody on staff who doesn't get complacent but continues to work hard. All right. Oh. So let's look at this type of loss. So if you have low loss frequency and low severity, then you retain that loss. If you have high frequency but low severity, then you focus on loss prevention to cut down on the loss frequency, and you retain those losses. If you have low frequency but high severity, okay, then you bring in insurance. Low frequency, high severity, you bring in insurance. If you have high frequency and high loss severity, then that is something that you consider avoiding altogether. All right? So that's a really good table for you to look at and understand where does insurance fit in. Low frequency, high severity. Okay? All right. Risk managers may have to modify their techniques based on conditions in the insurance markets. Once you pay for insurance, then that insurance renews. And when it renews, the terms, the provisions, and the costs, the premiums might change. So the insurance market typically experiences what is called an underwriting cycle. And in a hard market, profitability in the insurance industry is declining. Why? Because losses were higher than expected and the premiums were too low, and so profitability is declining. And so insurance companies tighten their underwriting standards. Okay? That means that they turn away more business and they increase premiums. Okay? And insurance is hard to obtain. So after a hurricane, it is much more difficult to get property and casualty insurance, and your rates are going to go up. And after a hurricane, if you own a sailboat or a boat in the marina and your boat's been damaged, the repairs will be covered. But when you go to renew your insurance, your premiums are going to be much higher. Okay? In a soft market, that means the losses have been low compared to premiums. And so the insurance company loosens their standards, which means they accept riskier business, and they cut their premiums because they're making tons of money, and insurance becomes easier to obtain. So you have hard markets and soft markets, and as a risk manager who's out there having to negotiate insurance contracts on a regular basis, you have to stay on top of what's happening. Okay? To implement a risk management program, you have to have a risk management policy, and that policy outlines the objectives for the risk management program and details how these objectives will be accomplished. You have to educate top-level executives. There has to be buy-in from all of the management team to this risk management program. If managers rebel against the program, it is going to be very difficult for you to implement it. Okay? The policy gives the risk manager the authority to work with all managers, so you have to hire a risk manager, you have to create that position, hire the right person, and then you have to empower and authorize that person to negotiate practices to mitigate risks. So again, buy-in and authority. And you have to provide guidance on how to train employees. Employees need to be aware of what's expected. Okay? And then you list standards to judge the risk manager's performance, like you do with every manager. Here's the job, here's what you're supposed to accomplish, and now we're going to evaluate the risk manager once a quarter or once every 6 months or once a year. How is the risk manager doing? All right, so you have to have cooperation from the other departments, and the program, the risk management program, is not something that you create and then leave. You have to monitor it and you have to update it periodically. Okay? And again, this is all about costs and benefits, and those benefits can be financial benefits and they can be anxiety benefits as well. So it's a loop, and you create the program and then you're constantly monitoring conditions and circumstances and operations and people and laws and regulations and technology to determine if you're still addressing loss exposures, identifying and addressing loss exposures, and if you're still doing that in a way that is cost effective and that makes sense. All right, that's the end of Chapter 3. This is Dr. E signing out for the moment, and you guys jump on the homework, answer those homework questions, and that will prepare you for Dr. E's incredibly creative and difficult and challenging exams. Peace out, shalom. I'll leave you with that thought of a difficult exam. You need to worry about that exam. Maybe you need to get some insurance to cover you for that exam. Peace out, shalom.